There we go. All right, thank you for joining us in this October meeting of the Community Advisory Board. Thank you everybody for being here today. We got quite a bit on the agenda. It is being live streamed and it will be posted at the accgov/accgov.com/100. You can see it there on the screen, so you can go back and review it. So without any further ado from me, I will turn it over to Megan to get us started on this meeting because we got a lot to cover on the agenda. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mike. So, as I mentioned, we do have quite a bit on today's agenda, including reviewing action areas, giving a recap of the October 12th Commission meeting report out that we provided last week, and then talking through 2 proposed SLOSS projects for near-term solar as well as an EV vehicle accelerator. So welcome, CAB members. I'll go ahead and do a quick attendance check, running through each your organization names. And when I call your organization, if you are present, please chime in and tell me tell us your name. So we'll start with 100% Athens.
Hi, Michael Songster. I'm here.
Hi, Michael. Action Inc. Action Inc. Athens Area Home Builders Association.
Newland with Gentleman Construction.
Hello. Athens Housing Authority.
Charlie's here.
Hey, Charlie. Athens Land Trust. Athens Land Trust.
Tawana did say that she would be at another meeting.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Athens Technical College. Athens Technical College. Athens U.S. Green Building Council.
I'm sorry, we don't have a replacement for Athens Tech. The NAT has left.
Okay. Athens USGBC.
Tom Lawrence, he's here.
Hey, Tom. East Athens Development Corporation. East Athens Development Corporation. Northeast Georgia Black Chamber of Commerce.
Shane is here.
Hi, Shane. W&A Engineering.
Amy's here.
Right. Then
I'm
for our
close, but I'm
exhibition. What was that, Amy?
Oh, I said I've been out of the loop for about a month. So I'm listening mostly, trying to get caught up.
Okay. Great. Well, congrats on the new arrival.
Thank you.
Right. And for ex officio members, representing various ACC Gov departments, can you please identify yourselves and the department you're representing?
Andrew Saunders, Athens-Clarke County Central Services.
Hilda McConnell, Athens-Clarke County Economic Development.
I didn't hear the last person.
Pretty sure that was Beth Smith with Central Services.
Yeah.
Mike Wharton with Sustainability.
Erin Jimenez with the Inclusion Office.
Maggie Songster with the Office of Sustainability.
Jacob Lambeck with the Office of Sustainability.
Melinda Lord, Housing and Community Development.
Right. And then from the project team, do we have anyone from GreenLink joining us today?
This is Max Cox.
And this is Samantha McDonald.
Hi, Matt and Sam. And from the South Days project team, I'm Megan O'Neill, and I'm joined by my colleagues.
Erin Gallagher.
Maria Weber.
Lacey Davis.
Right. So we'll move on through to, okay, there you go, to today's objectives, which are to review the action area pro-con list and talk through primarily a new proposed approach to tier scoring, reporting out on the commission meeting and talking through the lost funded projects. So in terms of, and excuse me, you're gonna watch me navigate my browser for a moment here. We have added some additional action areas based on feedback received to date that you'll be sent this populated list. And so we wanted to walk through these at a very high level and then to transition into a broader discussion about more efficiencies for this review process. So what you're seeing here on the screen right now is talking through some additional options, some of which are already active, like the Community Energy Fund, pursuing renewable natural gas opportunities, addressing high loss water meters, formalizing a policy to deploy solar, EV readiness requirement, ACC as a solar energy procurement provider, expansion of landfill gas, exploring opportunities for ground source heat pumps, routine updates to sustainable building policy, setting concrete fleet conversion goals with some differentiation based on vehicle type, incentives for water conservation and targets for water reuse, adopting targets for percentage of facilities equipped with energy storage, education for first responders and building officials on energy storage, electric vehicles, and solar installations, taking an active role in the Georgia Power Integrated Resource Planning process, contemplating a green bank, and divestment of ACC pension fund away from fossil fuel investments. So we'll carve out time in the coming weeks to talk through these in greater detail, and we'll be sharing this link. I'm sharing this here to demonstrate that we're taking the feedback we're hearing and we're going to continue incorporating it into additional action items as it's appropriate based on the feedback we're getting. And with that, I'm going to segue to a revised approach.
Ask a question. Is this an appropriate time to suggest another item on there for Lisa looking at, or should we do that later on? And this is Tom Lawrence. Where I'm coming from is that, and what prompted me was hearing about the landfill gas. There's also possibility of collecting, methane emissions that comes from the wastewater treatment. I know when 2007, 2008, this is part of the recovery funds, when there was additional wastewater treatment facility was being talked about put in, and we were kind of working a little help with ACC about that. And the time it was decided not to invest in that there, I don't know if it's a cost benefit type thing or what, but time's a little bit different now. So I mean, I don't, maybe just the looking in to see if that's still feasible or not, really.
I have good news. This is Andrew Saunders. In the last service delivery update of our Public Utilities Department, they did include methane capture at the largest plant, North Oconee, where it is most viable, and spoke with their department director last week about it, actually. And so it's in a relatively short-term work program. They have to build a solids dryer, and then the methane capture will be a secondary component. With that in mind, I think it would still be good to highlight it in this plan, since it is a...
Yeah, I mean, it's going to contribute, so yeah.
So the short answer to your question, Tom, is yes, this is a good time.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to pull the screen back up and talk through a proposed revised approach, because we understand we're throwing a lot of information at y'all with regard to the scoring process and metrics. And so we wanted to run a concept by you to allow for the continued scoring, but maybe just make it a little easier to sense check viability for different items. And so I'm going to run through a proposed tier system that would provide you with a little bit of a baseline analysis based on the Southside Screen Link and Sustainability Office team's initial assessment of the items and the data we have to at least give you a little bit of added insight into our own take on things so that you can respond to that and maybe make things a little bit easier. And so we'll be breaking down each pathway within these 3 tiers I'll run you by. And when I say pathway, I mean the pathways we've been running through with action items to date. So here are the proposed tiers, starting with tier 1, which we're labeling most urgent for success. And these are going to be areas we identify that meet criteria of being just low-hanging fruit, very feasible in the immediate or short term, and or highest climate impact for Athens-Clarke County, with less regard to feasibility on that latter item. So those are items that should be prioritized for immediate action, essentially the no-brainers, if you will, and those will be the items against which we'll want to be measuring progress and tracking. So we'll keep this tier into up to 5 action areas per pathway to help ensure the highest priorities are addressed. And an example of what we mean here is just municipal building benchmarking disclosure. It's kind of an easy no-brainer because Athens-Clarke County is already doing municipal building benchmarking. So it's just a matter of making scores available to give you a sense of one of these quicker pathways. The second tier is more of a as opportunities present themselves. And so these are items that may be impactful, but may just rank somewhat lower in priority for a whole variety of reasons, including impact, funding, and just logistical challenges. So they'll continue to be considered and implemented as opportunities present themselves. And that might be through changing policies or as opportunities or funding become available. Example of that is floating solar. If the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority were to be throwing a whole lot of money at local jurisdictions to install solar, that would be something ACC might consider. And again, just examples. And then the third tier is obstacles ahead, which is looking at these things that might be illegal in the state of Georgia or non-starters that should be monitored, pursued, contemplated for the long game, but might not be immediate short-term action areas to prioritize. And so what we'd like to do is to go through and more or less take a first stab at categorizing the different action areas as sort of a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, share that with you, and then set up dedicated time to discuss it if appropriate, or to get your personal feedback via whatever communications mechanism you prefer. So we would do the pre-sorting. We would share those pre-sorted pathways with you a week prior to each meeting for review and revision. Then we'll spend the next 2 CAB meetings as well as 1 proposed supplemental CAB meeting on December 1st to discuss and finalize the scores and comments. And below you'll see the additional dates and deadlines associated with that. And then after the meeting, we'd consider the pathway covered and complete. So what are people's initial takes on that?
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the tier 1 where I think you defined it as low-hanging fruit and what highest climate impact, and is that specifically some sort of numerical score, considering the reduction in non-renewable energy, or what is that? Because I have some concerns that these 2 things make some of the thornier problems that are more equitable for our community look less attractive.
As somebody who's looked at that table, I kind of share that. I think maybe the most effective tier 1 is the one that's recommended, the 5 top priorities per area as recommended by this body. right? Because we know Athens best. And so it would be great to have the information about impact on the economy and impact on or feasibility and things like that when those decisions are being made. But I think ultimately, if this body wanted to take a completely different path that you see some other communities doing it, and they kind of shortlisted into a tier 1 project, that's why we're Athens and we're weird.
Yeah, so I guess maybe if we're being charged with looking at this through the lens of these tiers, maybe we can incorporate language into the, even something as simple as like highest climate and or community impact, something like that broadens, what our criteria would be for identifying those as important projects or, top priority projects.
We go for instant change, Michael.
That's a great adjustment. Does this approach sound like it might make it a little easier to identify which are the priority items for inclusion in the plan development process?
Yeah, I think this will be much better than seeing 100 things that seem to be all more or less equivalent in a long list. I think having more structure to it will make the sort of comprehending a pathway much simpler.
So Megan, did you go through the pathways? And I guess what I was looking at earlier on the spreadsheet, there's some of the traditional ones. Yeah, there you go. Buildings and energy, community, which I would actually say would be better for us to just say equity, energy equity, and be very specific about what community means in the terms of the agreement. But also, I would suggest that maybe given the effort that the business community has added, we have one for energy economy. So what are the 5 most important actions to advance to either grow or support jobs and or businesses that are in this pathway? I know that's challenging because you can have both energy equity and energy economy might bridge both transportation and buildings, but technically means there's 2 chances to kind of come in at a tier 1. I don't know what the rest of the group thinks about that.
So when you say energy economy, what do you really mean? The ecosystem of businesses that are going to support these other items?
No, I'd say it would break 2 ways. Actions that are either in support of existing businesses in the community that join us on this transition. So it might be something as simple as using property assessed clean energy financing for low to no interest funding to implement energy projects. Or it might be focused around the worker. So if, maybe one big audacious goal is to formalize a program here that focuses our educational arms with our job creators to create, make sure that people locally can get these green energy jobs rather than just importing green energy workers from Atlanta. So I would just say, what I'm envisioning, it would be anything that would benefit either the businesses or the workers. And that would be a little bit for us to define.
Yeah. So, okay. I'm just trying to think of a way that we could say it that wouldn't require us to explain it, right? You know what I mean?
We're all looking for that.
I know, right? It's hard. It is hard.
And the goal here is to pick our top tier, not because it's the easiest, but because those are what we think are the priority as a community. Anybody else have thoughts or suggestions?
I guess my only suggestion is sort of like sometimes things are a top priority, but they're nearly impossible to do. So that when we're thinking about those tier one items, is just sort of thinking about things that can help us get momentum that will lead to more difficult things, and just thinking about the relationships that have to be built in order to do some of the more difficult things. Just being sure that we don't give ourselves mountains to move in the beginning, when maybe it will be helpful to the larger picture in terms of like building the relationships and getting the ball rolling, to maybe have some small and medium-sized boulders in that first tier as well. Just sort of a strategy for building momentum.
So I was wondering, the second tier, I guess it was as opportunities arise, is that kind of what the wording was? I mean, there's something that might be where a low hanging fruit is. Maybe it's not a high priority for us in terms of community impact, but it might actually happen before something in one, simply because it's really easy to do. So just because it's in that tier two doesn't necessarily mean you have to do everything in one before you do that, right? I mean, is that correct? Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense, Amy.
Okay.
So if we see these, I mean, we've had them come up a lot of times where, we want to do something and for example, land purchases and a donor comes along and suddenly something that was way down on the list pops to the top because we have a grant or we have donations that would push it up and we just jump on it.
Okay. I just wanted, with Ilka's question, I just wanted to clarify that. So.
And the other part of this is part of the reason we're going through the bite by bite on the tier 1, 2, and 3 is so even though we're going to try to score them out to make them a little easier for us to consolidate, that does not mean if we're looking in there and we say, well, that appears in tier 2, but we really think as a group that needs to be a tier 1 or vice versa. That's the purpose of us going through this exercise is we can move things around. Hopefully we'll get it right the first run through, but if we want to make some tweaks, we certainly are able to do that.
Kind of addressing Ilka's concerns, that there were, I think in some of the plans that we looked at, they had policies and they had sort of the time horizon for completion of policies. And so you could have a tier 1 policy and understand that it's a 10-year project, or you could have a tier 1 project policy and understand that we can do that tomorrow and be done. And so I think that putting time horizons on them, so there's an understanding of sort of the size of the task, may be useful as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then along those same lines, I actually like having a tier 3 because there are really important things that need to happen policy-wise to support this transition, that Athens-Clarke County is only the tiniest of cogs in that system. So, for example, if you wanted to do true, proper community solar, maybe at a neighborhood scale, it's just simply not legal right now. And while we can advocate for that, we really need to be part of a broader coalition or look for federal guidance or something that would light that spark that might move it kind of from a tier 3 to a tier 2. And so as the plan is being updated, the first thing they should do is look at tier 3 and say, well, what's changed,
Mm-hmm.
if anything?
That's a good point.
Right. So on the bottom half of this slide, you can see the proposed meeting approach to this, and the first and third of those sub-bullets just represent upcoming CAB meetings on November 17th and December 15th. In the middle, you'll notice we're talking about adding one optional supplemental CAB meeting that would happen Wednesday, December 1st at 2 p.m. and be conducted in a similar format to the supplemental ones we conducted earlier this fall.
And the goal there is to break up those different pathways so we aren't trying to do 100 at a time. And we will be grouping them by the 5 categories, so that way we can also tackle them in block as we go through. That will be the goal.
Are we going to revisit each of those items again? Is that part of this process, or are some of them going to be just kind of inserted without much discussion? Some of the ones that maybe are less applicable to Athens or such.
Well, as we go through, I imagine that would be part of that discussion. Certainly, at any point that we need to talk about those things. So yes. And I would also think that would influence on, part of it is, and the reason we want to get them all together is, do we need to define them better? Are there things we need to refine better? And that's also what this process is for. So you'll see the list again come out, and as we put it all together, and then I think that's a great time to make those comments or send that in as well, so we can start looking at that to refine things and make them a little bit more surgical.
So when we do make them more surgical, I think I would recommend that we change we change some of the language to make it very, very Athens specific. So we don't really discuss transit-oriented development, since that absolutely doesn't apply here, but we discuss whatever components of that are specific to Athens and talk about it as it's specific to Athens, as opposed to just throwing out something that doesn't really apply and making people kind of search for where that connection is.
I agree. And hopefully, as people have done the and continue to add and send in by Friday your ideas, that's exactly what we're looking for. Is more of those. So as you're going through and refining it yourself and adding things to the list, that's also what we're looking for. Is those things which we, which are much more pointed and developed for Athens.
All right. Now I'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and send.
No.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and send out an invite to get that December 1st meeting on your calendars, and send out and be following up with those other resources. So with regard to the commission meeting that we had last week, where Mike, Andrew, and I shared out progress on the plan development process to date, and the stakeholder engagement efforts that have been undertaken so far, we received Oh, I'm sorry. I think I wrote CAB feedback. I meant to write commission feedback touched on. Forgive my typo there. So we received a good bit of very constructive feedback from commissioners, including the reference for specifics to be included within the clean energy plan on how it's going to be implemented, what will be prioritized, as well as information on anticipated general and specific budget asks. And by that, they meant things like staffing, budget, resources, and otherwise. There's also a request to make sure to identify metrics for evaluating success, as well as to explicitly provide guidance on the role of the state government, the Public Service Commission, and policies that may prove to be obstacles at the state level that the commission and mayor need to make sure to be mindful of in the years ahead. There's also talk about the need for transportation goals and EV infrastructure requirements, and some questions and points around the green jobs pipeline and how to ensure that new jobs stay local. They also surfaced a need to make sure to be partnering with the planning department on any number of initiatives where there's overlap in natural synergies. And a request was made to discuss the pension plan divestment from fossil fuels that was referenced in the initial clean energy resolution from a few years ago. Andrew, Mike, are there any other items that you'd like to lift up that were referenced in that meeting?
That covers them, and those were individual commissioners who were giving that feedback. So we didn't have it like an action of the commission. It was individual feedback from commissioners. So I thought what they were saying were targeting things that we were on track to do. So I appreciated their feedback on that. And one quick update from the previous slide, the December 1st meeting date should have already gone out. And if you don't have it, let me know, because I did send the link out to that meeting last week.
Great.
When we talk about metrics for evaluating success, and I'm sure that'll be part of what we do moving forward. I have one that is it may be a little unusual, but something that has stuck in my mind since kind of the very beginning when Matt was doing his ACES presentation was, where the benefits flow from the transition, and how, essentially 90% of the financial benefits of the clean energy transition flow to people who participate, people who, do energy efficiency upgrades, people who have solar panels, people who do drive EVs. And so it's really framed in my mind, one of the goals ought to be to gather as many participants as possible. We should have as many people participating in that process as possible, because that benefits will directly flow to them. And so that may be a metric that we think about, is actual individuals that are participating in the transition.
I love the idea, and I'd love to kind of figure out how we do that. But I love the idea.
I'm wondering, since Michael did just name drop Matt, if Matt has any initial thoughts on what Michael mentioned.
I think it's a great point, Michael. I mean, it's to me, this goes towards the things that, especially the things that Athens has direct control over. Having a really kind of explicit program delivery plan to make sure that the people who are getting in are the ones who are also the ones that need the help with those kinds of energy burden issues, that are going to benefit from those equity investments. Like making sure that you're taking kind of full advantage of the opportunity to create a more equitable community at the same time that you're getting the clean energy deployed. I don't really think that's any different than what you were saying, but I think there's tools that we've helped deliver as a part of this process that give us insight as to where those neighborhoods and communities are and what kinds of things are going to be most helpful to them. That I think those seem like next step things. Like once we identify what the what the policies are, and we're starting to actually deliver that infrastructure and those investments, these are the areas that are kind of in most need, that are going to benefit the most from having it brought to them.
And one other note on the commission meeting that came up was a few commissioners cited the Athens in Motion plan as a good model to pull from in terms of presenting a lot of these implementation items, metrics.
Megan, can you just say that again? I couldn't quite understand you.
Oh, excuse me. A few commissioners identified the Athens in Motion transportation plan as a good model to follow for presenting out the kinds of implementation logistics and metrics and commitments in this plan. So that's a recent transportation plan.
Great, thanks.
All right, now it's part of the meeting where I get to hand things over to Mike and Andrew. So just let me know when to navigate slides for you.
Okay. So the next part we want to talk about, we know and have all been working off the general understanding that we don't want to, as you know, in SPLOST 22, part of what we got was a $15.49 million allocation to clean energy to move the clean energy initiative forward. And we haven't wanted to spend that money until we had a plan. But we also all recognize that as this gap occurs, and we are going to continue to move forward with projects inside Athens-Clarke County, and we don't want to miss those opportunities or at least have a look at those opportunities as they go by to make sure that we don't miss them and then lose that ability to address our energy goals. Replacing a roof now, for example, if we don't consider solar at this point, may or may not give us the opportunity at a later date to do the same. So we brought to you two projects that are currently underway. One of them is referencing solar installation at Memorial Park. That's an example of one project that's underway that we have an opportunity to look at. The other one is what we call an EV accelerator. And the idea behind that one is, with timetables the way they are, what do we need to do to try to make sure we stay and are able to be where we need to be in our acceleration program, in our EV conversion and transportation areas, to be ready and be a leader in that venue. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to kind of walk through where we are with these projects. And we are looking at the end of it, we'll be taking discussion and also asking for a recommendation up, down, or modified. So Andrew, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. And specifically, Mike and I schemed up these concepts for your consideration because as we were bringing items forward for Mayor and Commission review associated with roof replacement and vehicle purchases, they specifically identified their desire to see a couple of projects move forward. So the first proposed project is to incorporate solar at Memorial Park. There's some good things happening at Memorial Parks. Last year, we wrapped up some energy audits of various ACC facilities, and we were actually able to allocate SPLOST 2011 energy money to implement those audits. And so our team in facilities management is doing an excellent job with that. Meanwhile, we also are putting some capital reinvestment in at Memorial Park. So we're replacing the roof and most of the HVAC units. And so when you look at an HCC portfolio, here you have a roof that's going to last as long as it'll ever last on, kind of day one, and you're increasing the efficiency of one of the primary buildings. So we thought it'd be wise to bring forward a proposal to deploy solar at that site. I'm going to briefly share my screen if that's all right. Because Memorial Park, the one downside to it is it's got a lot of trees, and so as a former forester, I love that. This is kind of the main hall there as you come in. Certainly, there's quite a few buildings down by the zoo, and there's, I don't know, 8 or 10 energy meters at Memorial Park. It's a hot mess. But this is the building that's receiving the roof replacement, and you will see two things about this building. One is there is a good bit of shade, so we would not project being able to utilize the full roof area for solar. The second is Mike probably knows better than I do, but that building's old as dirt. I believe it was some kind of disease. What was it? It wasn't
Tuberculosis.
tuberculosis ward. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. And so, not built to modern code means we might not be able to use modern equipment. So, tentatively, we have budgeted a fairly high price for solar, um, knowing that we might have to go with something like thin film solar or an alternative method that would be higher cost. So, I'll stop sharing for a second. I think you all get an understanding of what Memorial Park looks like.
And when Andrew mentions the fact that we're pricing it, we do want to assure folks that if the project comes in under budget, that money will go back into the fund. It's not where we're transferring the money into the SPLOST account or whatever the budget account is. We plan to keep a very tight hold on those pennies and not let them go.
Is with projects with Athens-Clarke County facilities, so determining the size of the system, that is based on current projected use. I mean, is there any sort of looking forward that let's build the system so it could be added to if at some point we could do community solar and maybe that neighborhood could draw off of that, is this system going to produce more than that facility needs?
That's an excellent question. So when Athens-Clarke County adopted the 100% goal, we started to aggressively oversize our systems where feasible, and that's because we got more total energy generation. That has to be done within the requirements of the utility, so they will only allow so much to interconnect to their grid, although that's changed. Memorial Park, though, is a different animal. In this case, we've sized it based off of approximate estimates of available roof space. It does align pretty well with that particular building. So with the building that it would be situated on, we anticipate that it would offset about 40% of the electricity use, which would account for 20 tons of CO2 avoided each year.
Is there, in terms of looking at, electric vehicles and providing for them in the future, it seems like a facility like Memorial Park, I mean, could be, people who live in the neighborhood, maybe there's some way, how easy is it to set up charging stations and have it pull from what's on the building? Is that something to think about, or?
Yeah, so not to go too crazy technical on it, when you have solar tied into a building, if you can pull your charging stations off of there, there's obviously a direct clean energy benefit to those vehicles, assuming the sunny out and conditions are right. On the other hand, it doesn't always work out that way. It depends on the size of the panels and the electrical systems in the buildings, and so we can't draw a one-to-one connection on those, but so.
Along those lines, Amy, we are looking at in a separate effort initiative inside the office. We're trying to scope out where priorities would be for charger placement and kind of develop that idea so that we can better guide and provide at least a foundational start for when we start getting money and we start looking at, okay, we got charger money, now where? We're actually in the early stages of working through that. So yes, that's great to be thinking, and we're trying to frame that out for folks to help a little bit. So we'll bring that forward too, and certainly take more input because we're always after that.
And just to speak up on that, charging directly from the sun. When I had my system installed almost 2 years ago now, basically it comes off the inverter. So maybe what inverter you select, such that it's adaptable to that. And there are certain brands that are like the one I end up having. I'm not going to make an advertisement from who it came from, but I mean it was an easy do. But it might make a difference on if the goal was to have it charged direct, then that might make the choice of who you go with and what brand that might make a difference. Just my observation.
I think as we dabble and expand our EV charging equipment, we can certainly look into that. Just out of curiosity, does the inverter pull backwards? What's it do at nighttime? You got storage built into your system?
I can actually, yeah, it does, because I can pull in, and even if, let's say I'm generating, 2.5 kW, and the charger, when it's running full out, is about 3.3 or so, it will take all that 2.5 and then supplement it from, the rest. And so, or if I just come home at night and it's sun's down, I can still charge it up with a fast charger. Also, I have a plug-in solar charger that came with the car in the first place too. So
Okay.
What's the scope of what's happening over at Memorial Park, and where is it in this process? I know you're replacing HVAC units and I guess the roofing material, but not other structural components or doing other upgrades in the building?
So we're not doing like windows or other capital improvements. The energy audit did have some recommendations, a little bit remaining on lighting conservation or retrofits, LED bulbs here and there. I believe on a different energy meter, but at the same location, there's a recommendation for a high efficiency pool pump. And then there's also some water heating components related to, I believe, a recirculation system, and changing the drives on any remaining HVAC equipment to be variable speed. So,
And is the roof replacement completed, or is it not yet done?
so it was just approved last month.
Okay. And is there an opportunity in the roof replacement or due to the building assembly to add insulation at the roof line, or does that take place somewhere else in the building? I guess I'm saying if you're looking at a relatively expensive solar technology, is there some middle ground where a certain amount of that money is done where that may be more impactful energy efficiency upgrades, and then maybe less is spent on solars, and potentially then you can distribute it in such a way that the roof can take it, and you're using more traditional solar. I mean, I'm just looking at ways that money could be, I guess, have you looked at ways where that money could be split up if there are other opportunities?
So the energy audits that we had done in this last round, in a couple of instances, did recommend changes to insulation within facilities. Those were not recommended at Memorial Park. They felt like existing conditions were suitable. And within the realm of the energy audits, we saw things with a simple payback between, say, 6 months and 30 years. So it wasn't that they were only looking for the low-hanging fruit. They were, in some cases, they even talked about swapping out transformers and other items that might not be on your everyday list. So given where we're at and also just the construction of that building, I don't know that we would recommend additional structural changes at this point for energy purposes. Are there any other questions or anything that what anybody wants to discuss before you consider if you'd like to recommend this to the commission?
I was going to mention about the insulation materials. The reason it may not have risen as high in that audit as you would have expected for an older building is back in the early 2000s there was a renovation project, and LEED was used, I believe, as a guidepost, if not part of that effort. So they did upgrade a lot of things at that point, which we know now what was considered gold then is now kind of standard. But that is probably why that didn't score as highly as you would have expected.
Is anybody within the cab willing to make a motion either in support or against this initiative?
This is Charlie. I'll motion support.
That was Michael, and I'll second that.
Okay, so this is I think this is the first kind of formal vote we've done, right, of this. So everybody in favor say yes.
Maybe roll call.
Everybody want to do it by roll call? All right. So I get it right. I need to pop up the list so I make sure I go through the roll correctly. All right, so 100% Athens, which is Michael.
Yes.
Sustainability Office, I say yes. Action Inc. was not here today. Athens Area Home Builders.
Yes.
Athens Housing, Charlie.
Yes.
Athens Land Trust, Tawana was going to be late. Technical College is not here with us. Athens U.S. Green Building Council.
Yes.
East Athens Development Corporation. Northeast Georgia Business Alliance.
Yes.
And WNA.
Yes.
So there
Mike,
you have
can
the
I
record.
ask? I see a Carrie on here. Is that Carrie Ritzler? She might have tuned us out. Okay, if Carrie Ritzler's on here, she may be able to represent alt, is my understanding. But either way, I believe the yay is carried.
Yeah, it's a busy time of year, but
Yeah.
that's just the way the last 3 months of the year are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Carrie,
All right.
Carrie, we got you. Did you hear what Andrew said, or were you tuning out? Okay.
Okay, we'll revisit that later if needed.
Okay. Thank everybody for that. So the next one we're going to touch on is the EV Accelerator Program. That one is a bit more of a challenge, and we're going to walk through some of the challenges that we're facing. And so we're looking at this again from a leadership standpoint of what should we be doing, or what should we consider to set that leadership standard for the community and helping move and make EVs more acceptable within the community and move us toward that way in the area of transportation. So Andrew, you want to kind of walk through the fleet replacement situation?
Sure, thank you. Y'all are about to become way more knowledgeable in Athens-Clarke County fleet than you'd hope to be. There was a proposal that we're bringing forward to fund the cost of 19 electric vehicles and their associated equipment. And upon sharing that with you, saw some feedback about a desire to maybe not fully fund. And so the good news is today we come bearing alternates for you to consider. But before we do that, I just want to give you the context in which we make our recommendations. Athens-Clarke County has around 785 assets in its fleet management and replacement program, and each user pays a fee, ideally some portion of the vehicle's value, for a future replacement. And so in that concept, they're supposed to be funding their next vehicle. The majority of our vehicles are on a 15-year replacement target, although almost no vehicle is replaced at 15 years. And then our public safety vehicles are on an 8-year cycle because of the high durability of use. Unfortunately, we have more than a $7.5 million backlog that is projected to grow significantly over the next couple of years. The concept is not new. Actually, I guess I could just actually present the shows. The concept's not new. It was the fleet replacement program. I don't know how long it's been around. I've analyzed it going back almost 15 years. And you can see here what was called the unrestricted net position. So this was the piggy bank. And as short as, say, 7 years ago, we had approximately $10 million in reserves to fund our replacement. Unfortunately, a couple of things happened. One is we started to spend that down as we bought more expensive equipment, primarily fire apparatus. And then the decision makers in our community started to underfund intentionally fleet replacement, hoping to shift those burdens to SPLOST. So if you look at the annual contributions by year, blue are actual contributions and orange are projected. So you'll see that we were actually on a 5-year growth path to try to get to a sustainable position. And then in FY20, they removed all public safety assets from the budget. And then in 21, they actually removed all general fund contributions, which would be things like the planning department and central services, leisure services, and others. The good news is in 22, I absolutely just made a huge deal about this, brought a lot of information, and so they actually put $2.2 million into it, and I've shown them that they're actually going to have to get to $4.5 million a year by FY26 if they're going to meet their funding obligations. Breaking it up between public safety and non-public safety, specifically because there's a SPLOST program for public safety, you'll see that we are going to make really good headway this year because there's about $3 million of SPLOST money coming on the table, and so we're spending that money down. But then unfortunately, we project that balance to grow bigger than it is now through FY25 before we can work those expenses off. It's not quite as significant jumps in all other government uses, although you will see the number is higher. So we currently hold about a $6 million balance. That'll go to $7 million of eligible equipment that's not being replaced. And again, we are not projected to meet our funding requirements until FY32. Sorry to jump. We separate our vehicles by class. So here you'll see the various different kind of major classes that we use and the types of vehicles. And then I'm also showing you in that third row there the number of vehicles we replaced through that 2-point-some-odd million dollars in FY22. And just using that as a benchmark, because I know one of the questions was how many do you intend to replace? What the target is on year. So if you're replacing 2 of 24 vehicles this year, then in simple terms, that means that you're replacing every vehicle in 12 years if you maintain that pace. And so you'll see we certainly are not meeting our 8 and 15-year pace requirements at this time. We have a really significant number of hybrids in the fleet. I didn't bring that data because I didn't have time to compile it. But we've really been able to scale that with SPLOST 2011 dollars. And to date, we only have one plug-in vehicle. It's a Prius Prime over in Leisure Services, working great. So there's going to be 4 options I'll talk you through. The first is the one I shared with you, which is to fully fund 19 vehicles across different classes and 19 sets of charging equipment from the SPLOST program. Comes in at about a little over $1 million. There's a variety of reasons why we're asking for this now. Most notably, there's a real logistics problem with procurement. So for example, with some of like the e-transits and the new pickup trucks coming online and some of these vehicles that are really common in our fleet as it relates to type, we're looking at somewhere between 18 and 36 months from purchase order to delivery. not to get too bureaucratic and boring, but at the time I issue a purchase order for a vehicle that might not be delivered for 3 years, I have to have a funding source designated today. And I cannot, once I encumber that money, I can't use it for another purpose. And so, as you can imagine, our customers that we serve get really angry if we tell them they're getting a new vehicle and all they got to do is wait, 1.5 to 3 years to get it. So that's one of them. The second is we are seeing kind of a watershed moment within fleet availability that previously we saw kind of first gen vehicles. I can explain that those were not well suited for our needs. And then we were seeing luxury vehicles. And as much as I would love to see a Tesla in the Athens-Clarke County fleet as a taxpayer, I absolutely don't want to see a Tesla in the Athens-Clarke County fleet. And so we had to wait for, let's say, the everyday man's EV to come online. And then, the commission has been very intentional. They want to see more EVs come in. And I've just explained to you the challenges that we're facing financially. So option one would be fully fund out of SPLOST 2020. Option two is, say, the not too hot, not too cold approach. In this case, SPLOST 2020 would pay for the charging equipment. They would also pay for just the additional cost of the vehicle to convert it from a gas engine vehicle to an electric vehicle. And the fleet replacement fund would bear the base gas engine vehicle cost. Now, to be very direct with you, because of that whole procurement thing that probably bored you to death when I told you about it, we would ask that the full purchase order be issued under SPLOST 2020 as a placeholder, and then as it comes time for us to make these contributions on delivery, we would change that purchase order to only encumber these operating funds as needed, but we would certainly be attentive to those commitments. If we're going to do that, the only way that I can recommend that we do 19 vehicles on a split out of the fleet replacement fund, because we just simply don't have this kind of money, is if you all were to make a recommendation to the Mayor and Commission that says that this split is contingent upon them meeting their planned fleet replacement goal. So for example, if a vehicle is delivered next year, if the fleet replacement program has received the $2.6 million it's projected to receive, then we would make our match. If it's delivered the year after, if it's received the $3.1 million it's projected to receive, that they're aware of those commitments, Athens-Clarke County Fleet Replacement would make the match. On the other hand, if we have a tight budget or don't make those commitments, then we cannot commit to the match, which would mean that the SPLOST program would pick up the full cost of the vehicle. So that's kind of a gambling's approach. If you don't want to gamble, if you were to do that, this shows you what our post-program EV percentages would be. So we'd start to knock off some percentages in those classes 1 through 3. You don't like to gamble. I still absolutely understand the desire to not fully fund the cost of a vehicle. We could just split it with no recommendation to the Mayor and Commission about future funding requirements. If we were going to do that, though, I cannot commit the Athens-Clarke County Fleet Program to such a large purchase. And so looking at the numbers and the distribution, I could probably make up the funds for 8 vehicles. It comes to about $177,000, $178,000 of existing money and a smaller contribution from SPLOST. This is the modified numbers if you go with option 3, so you'll see generally lower adoption rates. And here's a summary of your options. And of course, option 4 is to make no recommendation at this time, take no action, and we'll just continue to bebop along like we've been doing. So those are your 4 options. Would you all prefer that I leave these up while we field some questions, or would you like me to stop sharing, and you can see each other during some dialogue?
I think I can agree there. I think leaving them up may be useful for
Okay.
conversation. So I guess I have one question. That is, you said the mayor and commission had for FY 22 they had put in $2-something million for
Correct.
the fleet. So I guess one question I have is why, if we don't hold them hostage to fund it fully in the future, does the amount that you can commit from vehicle replacement drop from 432 to 177?
Because we've already made our FY22 purchases, which include some specialty equipment that's quite heavy or quite expensive. So for instance, we're issuing a purchase order on a crane truck to serve our water utility. That's about $250,000. We've had to buy basically like a backhoe to the tune of about $80,000. And so when we do our fleet replacement, it's a mix. And so we did not fully spend the $2.2 million because we do need to save for a rainy day, although it's been storming a lot lately. And that's how I've come to the number that I can commit around 177 under today's assumptions.
And so you anticipate that the environment would be it would be similar in, say, FY 23 and FY 24, which is there'd be, something less than a couple $100,000 that you could pull in for these other sort of light duty vehicles, which is how we get to the future funds of 400,000. Is that more or less it?
Yeah, so, and this touched a little bit on that ROI discussion that you fielded by email, which is, hey, aren't you replacing these vehicles anyhow? And the answer is yes and no. We certainly aren't replacing everything that needs to be replaced or everything that's due. And so if you were to make a recommendation that ties Athens-Clarke County's match from the fleet fund upon hitting their projected funding targets that the Mayor and Commission have been presented in the Big Rocks discussion, then each year that actually grows. I'm going to jump way back up here. You can see that we're actually gaining 400K approximately a year over 5 years. And so there's going to be a natural portion of FY, let's say 24, like we were probably going to buy a pickup truck or a transit van. And so now it's easy for me to make that commitment because it's a future commitment contingent on future dollars. But when we look at FY22, the majority of this has already been committed to non-EV purposes. Does that make sense? Are there any other questions?
How significant is this effort, the vehicle replacement with EV vehicles in the overall scheme of things?
I mean, it's quite significant from an environmental perspective. So we're burning about 1 million gallons plus of fuel per year. Ballpark between diesel and unleaded, you're looking at about 19 pounds of CO2 per gallon. It's far more efficient. Even if you're pulling non-renewable energy out of the grid is more efficient than gasoline, and the vehicles themselves are more efficient at using that energy once it's delivered. So kind of a poor person's rule of thumb is you're looking at a vehicle that's 3 to 4 times more efficient, regardless of what the energy sources are that are used to power it.
So this would have a big, so in terms of our new tier system, this would be a pretty big impact towards us achieving our goal.
I believe Matt has identified, or sorry, Greenlink has identified that transportation makes up about 40% of our community's energy use. It depends on how you view Athens-Clarke County energy use. Certainly, having a solid waste and a transit department can shoot up energy fuel use significantly. On the other hand, we also operate water utilities, so it just gets into how deep you want to dive in the numbers. I will say that I'm optimistic that the evolution of vehicles and the deployment of electrics combined with kind of our current conditions means that there's a lot of opportunity for us in electric vehicles.
One of the things that I thought about a lot in as we brainstorm this is, people are reluctant to jump into new things quickly. And one of the really big things that stood out for me on doing this is that we would get vehicles on the road at the front end of the curve because I mean nobody else is getting them much any quicker than we are. So if we can be at the front of that curve and get those vehicles out there, then you will have people who stop the guy driving the F-150 and saying, "Well, what do you think of that?" And government employees, well, we chat a lot with the public, so it's also a great opportunity to do the sales job, and to have that proof of concept. And I really thought it, I love the environmental part of it, and y'all know I'm dedicated to that, but I also thought the PR aspect of it was pretty significant.
And Mike has asked, and we've agreed that we can do some branding on our EVs in the early deployment. We won't wrap them, so to speak, but certainly whether it's some badging or a sticker, it's something that you would notice much more than the manufacturers use themselves, like that it's an electric vehicle.
Andrew, I hope I don't come across as completely ignorant. I'm definitely a proponent of renewable energy sources and, clean energy sources. I guess my only question, and I don't know if anyone has ever brought this up or asked you, of course, we want to try to get off of fuel sources and become, more electric as we can, but what fuels the electric, the areas where they're actually,
Right.
plugging in, what fuels that and how does that balance out? You're not using fuel sources in the cars, but what impact are those charging stations having?
So we talked about, and it's this great question, and there's also a lot of misinformation around this. People want to say, "Oh, like I drove a Nissan Leaf," they'd be like, "Oh, it's a coal burner," and it's still more efficient than the dyno juice you put in your car. So right now, if you were to deploy these to just an Athens-Clarke County facility, you'd be getting the general grid mix. Greenlink or South Base can correct me. I want to say it's 5 to 8% renewable right now, and then there's also some nuclear, which has its impacts but is carbon neutral. However, kind of getting into some of Tom's discussion, we have a handful of facilities growing all the time, like a couple of our fire stations and other locations where we're adding solar. And so in that case, we have more influence about how much renewable energy is being used to power these vehicles. We're a long ways from being able to say that our vehicles are 100% renewable. But if we don't have electric vehicles, it's more difficult because then we've got to look at things like biofuels and renewable natural gas and things of that nature. And they're more expensive and quite frankly, not as good a product.
Yeah, I guess, and I absolutely agree. And I think maybe my biggest point is that may be something that you also need to focus on in your PR attempt to get that information out there to make people understand, yes, it's not going to be 100% conversion but it's still going to have this major positive impact on the environment. It's still going to reduce our dependency upon these fossil fuels that we know are finite. and also very damaging to the environment. So it's helpful to have that information at hand, especially for someone like me who has a very vague understanding. But that's much more tangible to hear that comparison of, no, it's not 100%. That's not feasible at this point, but this percentage is, and that's still a huge difference.
Yeah, I think I think that's a great point. If this group recommends options 1 through 3 and we share an agenda item, one thing that we could add is let's say the carbon CO2 output, equivalent CO2 output per 1,000 miles between the gas engine equivalent and the electric equivalent, and that way that's as close as we can come to some apples to apples work.
The other thing it represents is future potential, especially as we bring more solar on board and more batteries. The batteries are really one of the things that limit us as well, because you can hook solar directly to battery chargers that then can charge cars. So you literally have the electrons from the sun doing your work for you. We see those beginning to emerge. The technology is not quite there, but it is advancing fairly quickly. And as more batteries become more and more efficient, as we expand out our solar opportunities, especially over parking lots, like our array is going to be with the Family Protection Center, we begin to put those into place. We really think that represents a lot of potential future 5, 10, and 15 years from now, as these vehicles are still on the road.
Andrew, can you talk about the selection of either the 19 or the 8 vehicles here? Are these just placeholders for vehicles generally that need to be replaced? Are they specific vehicles that you've identified? And were they chosen based on replacement needs? Were they chosen based on offsetting as much gas miles as possible? You know, what was that process?
So they are not pre-selected for the same reason why it's difficult to sell an EV to a customer now is you set up an expectation that's followed by a long period. However, with over this period moving to $11 million of unfunded inventory, we have opportunities galore. So I'm confident I could place 19 vehicles today. I certainly could do it more over time. When it comes time, so when the vehicle is delivered, what we'll do is we will look at eligible inventory. So what has met the criteria and is in need of replacement, and then we will be looking at what's the use of the vehicle, how frequently is it going to be used, and so on. So a good example of that is, let's take the Ford Transit, the electric vans for a minute. We run a lot of vans. Well, we run a decent number of vans. A lot's an exaggeration, but we run a couple dozen vans in this fleet. We have some that are on the go all the time. The coroner would be a decent example of that, where they're transporting bodies and evidence and so on. We actually are funding a van in this cycle that is rotten to the core. It is the prisoner transport that you see downtown, what some people might call it a paddy wagon, right? So it's they haul the drunk kids to jail on Saturday night. We looked at the prisoner transport as an eligible vehicle and decided against it because it was very, very low mileage. Less than 30,000 miles on that vehicle, even though it's like 18 years old. And that's because it's only running from downtown to the jail a couple times a week. So we would prioritize a vehicle like a coroner's vehicle that's going to be getting 10, 15,000 miles a year over a lower mileage vehicle, and that will help to maximize the financial returns.
And that is a standard for the fleet. Is that not correct, Andrew? That's those are criteria you use no matter what.
Yeah, when we're replacing vehicles, independent of any EV decisions, we look at age, condition, mileage, and efficiency. And then we will make a recommendation of like a high, medium, low. And then we take that to our customers and say, what do we need? Here's the budget we're going to spend in your department. What do we need to shuffle? So I know that may be a bit disconcerting that I don't have exactly 19 vehicles, but that's the least of my worries when it comes to this. Procurement will be more difficult than deployment.
Are you saying we have a plethora of vehicles to choose from?
It's a target-rich environment.
Having been in a department where we got a vehicle replaced at 21 years and only because it caught on fire, I can attest that that is true.
If there aren't any more
Were
questions,
you in the vehicle when that happened?
Nobody was in the vehicle. It was in a parking lot.
If there aren't any more questions, I would ask if anybody on the group is willing to make a motion in support of one of these 4 options.
I'll go ahead. This is Tom Lawrence. I kind of like option 2. It's sort of a middle road approach, but I just tend to be that kind of person anyway. So
Anybody willing to second option 2?
This is Charlie. I'll second that.
Okay, I think we probably, since there's 4 options, it'd be a good point to ask if there's discussion around that. Does anybody feel uncomfortable with option 2 or likes option 2?
I'll say that I'm really, especially this early in the process, I am loath to do option 1. And not that it would set any precedents, and I don't want to seem insensitive to the great need that you probably face every day in getting vehicles replaced, but I do know from being involved in the structure of this that it was absolutely designed to be a marginal funding source so that ACC could upgrade beyond what they normally did. And in your case, as you say, normally they're doing nothing, and so upgrades aren't aren't very available. But even so, I don't think that this is the fund that should be used to correct that problem, that problem should be corrected by appropriate funding. And so option 2 does that. I also don't love issuing somewhat of an ultimatum to the mayor and commission, but I also would like to see more EVs on the road. So I'm a supporter of option 2.
And I'll add this if it makes the group feel better. If this will be communicated as a recommendation to the mayor and commission, they can do with it what they do with any recommendation. They can adopt it as recommended, or they can ignore it and go their own way. But let's say it's adopted, which I think is likely. If we miss our funding in the very next fiscal year, and we know now that that's going to shift burden to back to the SPLOST program, which I'm hearing from y'all is not your favorite concept. Certainly be happy to update you. We could talk about other orders that need to be canceled or delayed or changed. You know, I don't want it to just be where if there's an option, y'all are left on the hook for $1 million when really your goal is to be closer to the 576 and see this community meet its funding obligations.
I see this as also giving the option 2, giving us a chance to go ahead and place those orders, which is really a paramount thing if we're going to be first in line.
Andrew, this is Shane. I think last month on the SPLOST committee, didn't you come on and say something about needing fleet for the Athens-Clarke County government? Did we take a vote on that?
Yes, sir. So there's a SPLOST 2020 program to replace public safety vehicles. It was submitted initially at $2 million a year over 10 years for $20 million. Fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately it was included in the program. Unfortunately, it was included at around $700,000 a year for 12 years. So what was brought forward there was a replacement of public safety vehicles that the commission did implement with some minor changes. I will say that in all previous worlds, we have been taking that incremental approach from SPLOS. We would buy the base vehicle out of fleet replacement or whatever the other source was, and we'd pay the hybrid upgrade for out of SPLOS. We, in this cycle, did not do that. We just fully funded those hybrids out of there, and that's because the dollars and cents just say you're a fool to not do it.
Right.
And so, yes, you did see a vehicle purchase come out of a different SPLOS 2020 program.
I support option one, to be honest with you. I think one is better, but I go with the majority. Thinks. I mean.
Okay. Any other discussion before they go to the roll call?
Do you have a project from the T-Splost? Is that an applicable place to buy county vehicles?
Mike, why don't you?
Yeah, we do have we did propose a T-Splost as well. Again, looking ahead, T-Splost, if it was voted on in November, it wouldn't kick in. Plus the tiering would make a difference. So we wouldn't expect to even be able to start down the road of ordering the vehicles or until at least a year to a year and a half out from now, probably closer to 2 years. So it is there. There was a proposal to actually hit about 10% of the fleet in that proposal. But the downside is we're waiting probably 18 months to 2 years just to be able to place the order. So that's why we call this an accelerator program, because it's the idea of getting it out early and getting it out in front.
And along those same lines, if the T-Splost continues to carry positive momentum, then when these vehicles are delivered, we might not prioritize our transportation users first because there's another help is on the way. So we're always navigating the various funding opportunities and the strings that are attached, trying to make the most out of the dollars.
And Mike, this is Tom Lawrence. I have to leave now to go to my other meeting, but I will place a vote. If it still stays on option two, I'll put my yes vote for that when it comes around. But I have to go now.
All right, thank you, Tom. So we do have a nomination for option one. We have a nomination for option two and a second on two. So I guess we will start with two. Is that, unless there's a second on one, and then we could go in order? I don't know. How do y'all, suggestions on parliamentary rules?
Why don't we close out two since it has a proper second?
All right. So let's look at targeting a vote, a recommendation which recommends option number two, and we'll do a roll call. So we'll start with 100% Athens.
Yes.
Sustainability office I like one a lot, but I will go with two. So mine's a yes. Action Inc. Athens Area Home Builders Association.
Yes.
Athens Housing Authority.
Yes.
Athens Land Trust. Gary, you going to speak for them? Okay. Athens U.S. Green Council. That's Tom. He said yes. East Athens Development Corporation. Northeast Georgia Business Alliance.
Yes.
WA Engineering.
Yes.
And Carrie's popped on her screen. Do you want to see if she's comfortable?
No, I didn't discuss that with Tawana.
Okay.
I'm just listening in.
Okay. Not to put you too much on the spot.
No, that's okay.
Well, I know y'all were not anticipating going super long today, but I appreciate you taking the time. We'll draft these up. We'll be sure to share with you what's going to go forward to the Mayor and Commission, and thank you for the support.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Cindy?
So moving back to the rest of the agenda, I think it's really just wrap up at this point, right? So Friday, just a reminder, Friday is if you can send in any additions, we'll be compiling those. It's not a last chance, but we are trying to put a final a stamp on that so we can move forward. So on the grid, if you can finish things out, that would be fantastic. Get those to us by Friday. We'll try to get them out to you as in total next week so you can look at the total amount that's been submitted. Then expect us to start down the pathways and taking a bite out of it at the next meeting of the CAB on 11/17, November 17th. We'll have 2 more meetings after that. And then we'll be able to finalize our pathways and get to writing. In the meantime, one other thing that you can expect to see shortly, and I say that probably next week is what we're targeting. We will have our draft chapters 1 through 3 and addendum, so for you to look at and provide. We have redrafted that, reordered it, and rewritten it. So we do expect in the next week to 2 weeks to have that finalized from internal, so we can go out for review by the CAB to give you a week or two to kind of provide feedback. Those chapters are only focused on what we have done. So it's what we did, who we talked to, what they said, and how we went about doing it. So that's really what those chapters are focused on. And then we will be ready at the next phase to really start digging in and finalizing the pathways to get the whole plan approved. So if there are no more questions or input, anybody have anything else to add? I do have one slight bit of sad news. Jacob, who is leaving us at the end of this month, he is going to work for the Athens Food Bank. I can tell you unequivocally their gain is our loss and our loss is their gain. So we appreciate all the work he's done. He's come in, jumped in the middle of the fire and run like crazy. So he has done a fantastic job for us. So if you get a chance to tell him thank you over the next couple of weeks, he will appreciate it. And I certainly do appreciate everything he's done to help us out. We are working on the advertisement for Jacob's job and for the energy position. And I will let everyone know when that energy position is and Jacob's are up and posted so that, and I'll send the link to you. I do appreciate folks who've sent in other places to advertise. So keep those rolling. I'll be finishing that up with our HR folks by the end of this week, and we'll hopefully get this thing posted very shortly. So that's pretty exciting. So without anything else, if there's no more else, thank you all for coming and thank you for your time today.
Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.